came over here, so I had no idea what he was going to do. And yet, it turns out our two talks, as you're going to see in a few minutes, and I prepared mine yesterday when we knew we couldn't get Osborne here, actually look like they fit together pretty well. I'm going to take a look at where the economy is today and try and figure out where is it going to be by, let's say, 2018, about 7 years from now. And so let's take a look at the changing demography of the workforce through my eyes. If we look at the current economy, we see that today total employment as of December last month was officially recorded as 139 million, a little over 139 million people were working last month nationwide. If we look at the number of people who were unemployed, who were jobless, and in the labor force, so they were unemployed, we had 14.5 million people unemployed. That's why we've been so worried about the economy. That's the same thing as having a 9.4% unemployment rate, which was the official unemployment rate in the United States last month, according to the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. You'll also see, however, that the unemployment rate last month differed significantly based on who you were. Among adult men, the unemployment rate was 9.4%, equal to the unemployment rate for the entire economy. Women actually did better than men. Their unemployment rate was only 8.1%. Among Asians, men and women together, even lower, 7.2%. Among whites, 8.5%. But then you see the Hispanic unemployment rate was 13%, closing in on 1 out of 7 members of the Hispanic labor force unemployed last month, to almost 16% of blacks, 1 in 6, to over a quarter of teenagers were unemployed. So you get an idea of what the distribution of unemployment looks like last month. This is a dismal picture. To give you an idea of how dismal it is, you see that 9.4% unemployment rate? If you look at the last 4 years of the 1960s, during the booming economy, 1966, 1967, 1968, 1969, the unemployment rate never was greater than 3.9%. 3.9% in any month for 48 months in a row. So that gives you a comparison of where we are today. Others in trouble. What we're looking at in terms of these unemployment statistics are people who are fully unemployed. These are people who are looking for a job, the 9.4% unemployment at 14.5 million. They're looking for a job, but have not been able to find one. But there are also, in addition to that, 14.8 million, there's another 8.9 million people who want full-time jobs last month, but couldn't find them. So we really should add them in. Maybe they're not fully unemployed, but they're kind of part-time unemployed. They're part-time working, part-time unemployed. And again, these are people who wanted, or at least told the government they wanted a full-time job. Moreover, there are about 2.6 million people who are kind of discouraged. That is, they were looking for a job, and after looking and looking and looking, they finally gave up and stopped looking for a job. We call them discouraged. As it works out in our statistics, once you stop actively looking for a job in the United States, going on interviews, calling up firms to see if there's a job for you, and you finally just give up and you stop looking, you are no longer counted as unemployed because you're out of the labor force, right? Well, there are about 2.6 million people that we know were unemployed, but were so discouraged that they weren't even counted. Thus, you take the total number of people who are officially unemployed, the number who were part-time involuntary, and the number of discouraged, we are actually looking at 26 million Americans who were either fully unemployed, so discouraged that they dropped out of the labor market, or were part-time for what we call economic reasons. That's 26 million against 139 million who are working. That's a huge number. That means that about 1 in 6 Americans was either underemployed or fully unemployed. Given such dismal numbers, you might imagine that it would be a surprise to say that within a few years we might have exactly the opposite problem. but I'm going to suggest that, and then we'll have a discussion and maybe a debate about it. I brought together a few numbers for Massachusetts to show you where we are in Massachusetts, because I just came back from giving a talk like this past weekend. We had the Commonwealth Summit, and we had the governor, the lieutenant governor, we had 3 members of his cabinet, we had Ed Markey, our senior member of the House delegation, we had business leaders, and we had a number of academics. About 50 of us met for the entire weekend to kind of figure out, where are we today, where are we going, what are some of the problems that we have to face. And I was pointing out that unlike we've seen in past recessions, Massachusetts has actually done significantly better than the rest of the country this time around. Here you'll see the unemployment rates beginning in December '07, which was the month in which the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, declared we went into the recession. NBER is a private organization, but we rely on them to date recessions and recoveries. And you'll see how rapidly the unemployment rate rose from, in Massachusetts, only about 4.5% in December of '07, all the way up to 9.5%. The United States, even faster. In fact, if we want to look at it in more detail from December of last year, December '09, through December of last year, that last full year, you'll see that the United States in red had an unemployment rate that was up in 10%, 9.7, and so forth, falls only to about 9.4 by January. That is exactly 1 year ago from when we are now, well, a little bit more than a year ago. The unemployment rate was 9.7% nationally. It was 9.5% here. But if you look at the December unemployment, just 2 months ago, the unemployment rate in the United States was still way up at 9.4. We were down at 8.2. So from the point of view of improving the economy, we're certainly doing better in the country quite significantly, from a gap of just 0.2 of a point to a gap of 1.2 percentage points. This is good news, right? The other good news, and these data I only had through September, but I could have brought up, is that the growth in the economy in Massachusetts has been, across the board, pretty much better than the United States. Overall, since December of, between January of 2010 and September, most of last year, we saw growth overall in the economy of about 1.2% of jobs, compared with only 0.5%, that's all the way over there, for the whole economy in the United States. We had a huge boom in construction, huge boom relative to the country. Most of that was because we were using a lot of that stimulus money to rebuild the BU Bridge. Pretty much that's it. We did a lot of bridge rebuilding, we did a lot of road rebuilding, and now we're going to have to do it all over again, given what's happened to the ice storm. We were growing almost as fast as the rest of the economy in terms of manufacturing. Manufacturing's growing a little bit faster because there's been a real pickup over the year in auto production, of which we do very little. We were doing better in trade, in transportation and utilities, better in information, much better in financial activities, professional and business service, and so forth. So overall, we're doing better. But if we take a look at projections, and these are done by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, OMB, you'll see that we expect in 2011 to get up to about a 3.6% real GDP growth. Pretty strong growth. Up to about 4.2%, very strong growth in 12 and 13. And then we'll see it slow down to the point where by 2018, 2019, we're down to kind of a normal 2.5% growth rate. So a real spurt in growth is projected by OMB, right? We'll have to see whether that turns out to be true, but those were the kind of official projections of the White House through the Office of Management and Budget. Pretty good. Finally, economic recovery is on its way in 11 and 12. But if you look at unemployment, that unemployment rate is still going to be fairly high. In fact, what is fascinating, again, these are the official numbers. We do not get back to an unemployment rate below 6%, even with that economic growth, until 2015, 4 years from now. Remember, we had an unemployment rate that never went above 4% for the entire last 4 years of the 1960s. And a more normal unemployment rate would be somewhere around 5%. That would be considered kind of normal unemployment in this economy today. reflecting the fact that people are moving between jobs, and there's this kind of, kind of basic frictional unemployment. But that's pretty much a period of time in which we're going to have fairly high unemployment. So even going out a few more years, 2013, 2014, it doesn't look like we're going to have any kind of problem whatsoever in making sure we have enough workers to fill jobs in the American economy, right? One way also of looking at the economy is how fragile it is. Here you have, and these numbers were put together from official data by our colleague Alan Clayton Matthews, who's the official forecaster for the Commonwealth. Here you see what was happening in terms of monthly payroll employment change, excluding census jobs, because in 2010 we had millions of people collecting census data. And you'll see that we were up above about 150,000 in the early 07, and then it plummets to the point where, if you notice here, by early in 09, about 2 years ago, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. 800,000 jobs a month. And then we started seeing recovery, still losing jobs each month, but thank God, at a slower rate. And then finally we break into positive range, and only in the beginning of last year did we actually see growth above 150,000. And then through about the end of the year, we actually were growing at a slower rate than that. You need monthly job growth of over 150,000, probably closer to 200,000, to keep unemployment from going up. And the reason for that is that on the one hand, we continually get productivity increases. And in fact, we've had very strong productivity increases over the last year and a half. Productivity is output per worker. Output per worker. And so if you're getting a lot more output per worker, it means you need fewer workers for the same output. If your total output isn't growing very quickly or declining, right, you need a whole lot fewer workers. So we had a tremendous increase in productivity as firms even started to ramp up production, but they were doing it with the same workforce, not rehiring. And that's still where we are. You need to get up to about 150 to 200,000 new jobs every month to bring the unemployment rate down, in part to take account of productivity increase. The other thing we need those 150 to 200,000 for is just to cover the fact that the labor force continues to grow. We have more people coming into the labor market, and if we had no growth whatsoever, none of them could find jobs, or they would replace people like me, right? Or you. So that's the kind of growth we need. The problem we have, and this is what a lot of the debate is over now, is that period of time when we saw the economy start coming back, we had a number of pretty good stimuli in the economy. Maybe not strong enough. And this is in addition to what the Federal Reserve Board has done in keeping interest rates low. But we had tax rebate checks under Bush. We then had the Recovery Act, economic stimulus, ARRA. Then we had cash for clunkers, right? And then we also had the housing tax credit for first-time home buyers, all of which helped stimulate the economy. They're gone. All you had to do was listen to President Obama on the State of the Union address, or take a look not just at the federal government, but if you really think about stimulus from government, it also means state and local government, and every state in the country practically is cutting their budget dramatically. When I was with the governor on Saturday, he laid out a cut in the budget of $1.2 billion on a $30 billion budget, right? In California, they're talking about a $12 to $15 billion cut. So in fact, in 11, we will probably see, in some sense, relative to the past, negative stimulus. We're actually taking money out of the economy, particularly because of the loss in state and local spending. So all of that would say it all looks pretty dim. But we want to take a look at after the recovery. What happens when we go out a number of years? What does the labor market look like over a longer horizon as we see some of those longer-term demographic changes that Bob talked about? Well, a couple years ago, I did a major study for a group called Civic Ventures. You're going to meet the head of Civic Ventures, Phyllis Siegel, in a couple weeks. Actually, next week, I think. And we were asked to look at the question of how many jobs do we expect we will grow in the economy between 2008, when this first projection was done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and 2018, 7 years from now. And the answer was that in 2008, we had a total of about 150 million jobs nationwide, about 150 million, right? We have 140 million right now. But before the recession really got tough, we had that. The expectation, assuming that we get the kind of recovery that we saw in their charts, will be up to about 166 million employees by 2018. That's a growth of about 15 million jobs. It sounds real good, but I must tell you that's a growth rate of only about 1% per year. So it's not an extraordinary growth rate. It's much slower than we had, for instance, during the 1960s. So it's not like this is an extraordinarily rapid growth in employment, but it does say if we get the recovery, which is pretty much inevitable, although it seems a little delayed, by 2018 we're going to have a pretty good new set of jobs. We will have increased about 10% over a decade. Okay? We then looked at a particular sectors of the economy, particularly the Encore people or Civic Ventures wanted us to look at what they call the social sector. And the social sector is made up of the healthcare and social assistance, educational services, nonprofits, performing arts, museums, and libraries. That's the private sector, social sector. And those sectors are supposed to create about 5.2 million jobs over that 2008 to 2018 period, with 4 million of those coming in health and social services. In fact, last week I was in Washington with former Senators Daschle, Frist, former Governor Strickland, because we've started a new project, which was announced today in Northeastern News, to study the healthcare workforce over the next 25 years. And part of it is seeing the tremendous growth that is expected in the healthcare workforce, in part because we're older, we're all getting older, and we're going to need a whole lot more healthcare. That's what it's going to look like. We also have the government sector, and we took the government sector as being the social sector as well, and there's an expectation that there will be another 1.7 million jobs in government as the economy grows over the next 7 years. So that if we add the private sector, all those social sector jobs in health, education, nonprofits, performing arts, and the public sector, we get up to about 6.9 million additional jobs. Again, not a stunning number of jobs, but about 6.9 million out of about 15 million will be here. What is interesting also, at the same time we look at the twist in the demography, is to look at the twist in the economy. You talked about at the beginning. The manufacturing jobs, which made Mr. Cleaver rather unusual, to the white-collar jobs we tend to pay. Well, in 2008, of all the jobs in the economy, that 150 million jobs, a little less than a third were in the social sector, private and public. According to these projections, however, if we go out just 7 years from now, nearly half of all the new jobs will be in the social sector, and a very large proportion of them being in healthcare. The question is, will there be enough people, given the change in demography, to fill these jobs? Kind of a man bites dog story. You know, today we were so concerned, and we've been so concerned about the fact that there are not enough jobs. Is it at all possible there won't be enough workers? Okay? The answer is probably there will be, but only because of real fundamental change in labor force participation. So let me show you the numbers, right? If you look back at World War II, we got down to an unemployment rate of 1.2% in 1940, late 43. Remember, we went to war on December 7th, 1941, right? And within about a year to year and a half, we were down to a 1.2% unemployment rate from 11%. And it might have turned out very differently if it were not for Rosie the Riveter. Women coming into the labor market and taking blue-collar jobs, building aircraft and machine guns and all of that. Rosie coming into the labor force made all the difference. With employers desperate to fill jobs, millions of women joined the workforce, using their considerable talent to staff America's factories, America's arsenals of democracy. By the way, when I was researching this, I looked up the term arsenal of democracy, and it referred to my hometown of Detroit. But as a matter of fact, the real arsenal of democracy, the state that had the largest percentage of its workforce in manufacturing was Massachusetts, right? And all kinds of companies that you wouldn't think were in defense were. Most importantly, Necco Wafers. 40% of their employment was in defense. So the question is, from unemployed workers to unfilled jobs, with unemployment near 10% today, nationwide 9.4, it might appear far-fetched to suggest we may need Rosie's equivalent before the end of this decade. Yet, as the economy recovers, we'll almost surely see spot shortages in some key occupations, difficulty hiring because of structural unemployment, and soon after, the demand for workers could outstrip the supply in a broad range of industries. Will we need Rosie's equivalent later this decade, i.e., will we need many of you to continue to work much later in your life? So let me finish by just taking a look at the data. Here is the data, as estimated by the Census Bureau, of what the population will look like in terms of age cohorts from 18 to 24-year-olds in 2008 and in 2018. So by 2018, we will have actually fewer 18 to 24-year-olds than we have today. Okay? We'll have a little bit more 25 to 34-year-olds. Those are the echo boomers. We'll have fewer 35 to 44-year-olds, fewer 45 to 54-year-olds, those highly experienced workers. But we're going to have a huge population increase among 55 to 60-year-olds, 65 to 74-year-olds, and even 75 plus, simply because we're aging, right? I'm 66 now. I'll be 76. 10 years from now, I'm going to be somewhere around here. Okay? Here's another way to look at it a little more dramatically. This is in terms of millions. We're going to have about 800,000 fewer 18 to 24-year-olds. We'll have about 4 million more of the baby echo boomers. But we're going to have 900,000 fewer 35 to 44, about 1.7 million fewer age 45 to 54. But look at this. 8.5 million more people over age 55 to 64, another almost 10 million over 65 to 74, and so forth. That is dramatic. And it's all because of that huge baby boom generation in which you had about 70 million more kids born than you would have expected under normal fertility rates. We're just aging like the pig in the python as we go through this thing. Okay? Percentage-wise, this is what it looks like, right? Indeed, if we look at it in terms of the potential job gap, if we have no increase in labor force participation rates from the rates that exist right now by age cohort, we'll have a little more than 15 million jobs, but we'll only have 9 million new workers. Pretty large labor shortage. We will desperately need people. We'll be hunting them down. We'll be asking them to come in from other countries, right? We're going to try and get everybody to work, right? And nearly half those jobs will be in the social sector like health, and we may need those guys, okay? So the only way this can be fixed, with the exception of maybe a gargantuan increase in immigration, will be to get older people like me to keep working a lot longer, and some of you in the room as well, okay? So here is what we would project in terms of the labor force participation rates that we would need in order to fill that gap. For 55 to 64-year-olds, we'd have to go from about a 64% labor force participation rate to about 68. We'd have to go for 65 to 74, that's me, from about a quarter of us working to about 3 out of 10 of us working. Even for those over 75, go from 7.3 to 10.3. Overall, the labor force participation rate will go down because younger workers are continuing to see their labor force participation drop, and it's going to have to be made up by us. Right? If we do that, we'll be able to solve it. So the question is how do we coax older people to work? Okay? How do we get us to work? Well, employers are going to have to redesign jobs, take advantage of people like me, right? And restructure many jobs so they appeal to an older workforce. They're going to have to find ways of retraining older workers for new fields. We're actually going to be doing a lot of that for the Bipartisan Commission on the ways we could use older workers for some of the kinds of new jobs that are going to open up in the healthcare field, such as patient advocate, right? And we're going to have to create entirely new kinds of jobs. Adjunct teachers, mentors, tutors, content advisors, community health workers, chronic illness coaches, right? And What it will also mean, and this is very fortunate, is that for the folks who've had such high unemployment rates, remember those teenage unemployment rates, young adult unemployment rates, we may be able to finally see some progress there simply because of the demographics. We're going to need many of those young people to come into the labor force. In fact, there will be jobs for them. Don't hold your breath. It's going to take a few years to get there, but that's what we need to see, right? So, what's my conclusion? Despite high unemployment today, it is time to begin preparing for the future where we'll need all the older workers, younger workers, and immigrants we can find. And let's begin to figure out how to fill the jobs gap now, even when a jobs gap seems to be about as strange an outcome as one could imagine. Thank you.